grandmother, Mary Liddy Ogle Owenby. I am privileged through her to be related to the Ogles, the McCarters, the Reagans, the Trenhams, the Williamses, and other people who live around Gatlinburg. Between Tim and I, we're related to everybody that's in Sevier County. He's the lower part and I'm the upper part. My grandmother, Mary, she was BC, before computers. She had the genealogy in her head, and how she contained that, I don't know. But I remember people coming to talk to her, and she would find out who they were and who their grandparents were, and she could tell them how many ways they were related to one another. Now, my grandmother had all this in her head, plus she had the ability to tell stories and tell fragments of life out of the people that she knew. What I'm going to tell you today is based on some of her stories, some I've gleaned from other relatives and have put together with documents. You see before you a spinning wheel. How in the world can a body get genealogy out of a spinning wheel? It sure don't talk. It sets and gathers dust and demands you dust it about once a month. But what I'm going to tell you, whenever you start out genealogy, and a lot of people don't know, but on the 3rd floor of this library is the History Center, where they can teach you to trace your own genealogy. What you do is, whenever you begin your research, you start with yourself, because you know yourself really well, don't you? And if you're lucky enough, you'll know your parents and your grandparents, and through the History Center up there and the Ancestry online, you can trace people from all over the world. One good thing about you choosing Ancestry on the 3rd floor, your limited time on 1st and 2nd floor and at the branches up there, you can sit all day and talk to your relatives. Now, as I said before, to begin with your genealogy, you start with yourself. I have done that research for you, so I'm going to start with the farthest ancestor. I have this old picture of my 3rd great-grandfather, whose name was David L. Reagan, up on Rowan Fork, and he decided that he would join the Union Army and go out into the world, even though he had a wife and children at home. While in the service, excuse me, he contracted the fever and died at Gallatin, Tennessee. He lies there now in an unmarked grave. So this is what I'm going to tell you about him. My grandfather, 3rd great-grandfather, David L., built this spinning wheel. And he gave it to the daughter that could spin the most flax. This is the smaller of the wheels. This is a flax wheel. Whereas the great big ones, you spin cotton with them and wool. All right. How this got to me is an absolute miracle all along the way. Great-grandpa made it, as I said, for the daughter who spun the most flax. My great-great-grandmother, whose name was Lydia, she won the flax wheel, and therefore it came to her family. Now, from her, Grandma Liddy married a man by the name of Alfred McCarter, who lived up on in Cartertown up in Gatlinburg. Great-grandpa Alfred, he also went off to the war with his 2 brothers. His other brother was Fate, or Lafayette, and right now I can't think of the other brother. But whenever the first battle begun, Great-grandpa Alfred went into battle, and he received a bullet hole in his rucksack that he's carried with him. So he said, and I quote, "I'm going back to Sevier County. This war ain't for no man. I'm going to go home and make liquor." And that's what he did. And great-grandpa come back home. He had a pretty little copper. He had a pretty little copper still. And he made liquor, and he took it to Knoxville. And it is said that he would put a quart jar of moonshine in a shoebox and go down on Market Street and sell shoes to the people he knew down there. Well, Grandpa got caught, and they charged him with selling liquor without a stamp. So he had to come all the way from Rowan Park down here to Sevierville, which at that time would take about a day's journey. Great-grandpa, whenever he came back home, the people were very interested in his reactions as to what it was like in the big city. So he says, "Well, them people down there in Sevierville, they're plumb crazy. They have no gumption, and whenever they made coffee, if you flung it against the wall, it wouldn't have strength enough to run down." So that's what he believed. He is buried in Cartertown Cemetery. After him came his daughter,
her name was Mrs.
which is my great-grandmother Nancy.
And her husband was the town cobbler, and in those days,
This picture was taken in the front yard of where I live today. The house is gone, and I live in a small apartment, and it's been in the Owenby family for at least 150 years, that property has. So I really, really feel like I'm at home, since the spirit of my grandmother is there. Being 48% Irish, I have the feelings and the superstitions and the second sight or third sight, as people might call it. I can sense, like my grandparents did, whenever something is wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I have experienced sudden wakefulness and bothersome, and I didn't know what in the world was wrong. So I started praying. Somebody somewhere needed my prayers. Somebody somewhere needed what I had to say. So I would get up, and the next day I'd always find out it was either, most of the times it's a relative, and sometimes a very close friend who had died or was in trouble. Okay, my great-grandmother was a basket maker. This is one of her baskets. She probably made it in the 1920s. A man by the name of Lee C. Ogle that used to live in the Glades, and his house is still there. It's been turned into an artist shop, and the painter, the artist still lives there. He one day, we was helping my uncle clean off his lot up in Ogle Woods, and he found out, Lee C. Ogle found out who I was, and he was well in his 80s. And the next day he come up the road with this basket on his arm. And he said, "I want to tell you that in the 1920s, I saw your mama, your grandmother, here at the grocery, with a little bitty trading post in the Glades. And my great-grandmother," he thought it was my grandmother, why her, you know. And so he said, "I bought this from her and told her I wanted a basket that would hold 10 dozen eggs. And she bought it for me, and you can still see some of the colors that she used to dye it with. But it holds 10 dozen eggs, and she charged the man $1 whole. Y'all know what the work has done to get this? She had to go out, find the wood, split it up, work it into a basket, which took hours and hours and hours and hours. She also made fly swaths. She also made small little baskets that would hold one egg, and she gave it to each grandchild. And I have somewhere on this thing, which I'm a person who loses stuff, even if I'm standing next to it. And she gave each grandchild one, and I've got my mother's. Well, great-grandmother Nancy, she helped her father Alfred in the making liquor. And great-grandpa Alfred had a nice little picket fence around his head, copper steel, and he grew roses and marigolds on that fence. And so grandmother had a sister by the name of Lydia, and Lydia had a very bad cancer in her side. And she went off to visit some of the other relatives. And so my grandmother had went to the spring to get water and came back. And she saw her sister Liddy sitting there. And her sister Liddy says, "Nancy, when are you going to change your ways?" And grandmother ignored it and went on to the house. And when she got there, she asked her mother, "Mom, when did Lydia get home?" And her mother said, "Lydia is not returned. She's still over at such and such house." Well, that afternoon, come to find out that Lydia had died, and my grandmother had seen her departing spirit. We, in my family, it is unspoken, but we sense when people are going to die, or when they die, and we always believe that they come to visit us after they die in some particular form. Now, my grandma Nancy, come my real grandma, Mary Lydia Ogle Ownby. She married, in this picture, Brazelton Ownby, and this is a picture of their wedding day. Her sister-in-law, Josie Whaley Ogle, made this dress for her. This is her wedding dress. And if you will look at it very closely, you'll see she's got lace on her petticoats. Back then, at this particular time, if you were rich enough to afford store-bought lace and put it on your petticoats, you'd let it hang down below your dress to show people that you were rich. Okay? Logical. All right. This picture, my grandmother Mary, my mama, and that little bitty mean thing right there is pretending like she's trying to be good is me. This is a 3-generation pictures, which I urge you, if you have family members that stretch many generations, take pictures of them. This is the most important picture that I have in my collection. And my mother and my grandmother Mary, my grandmother Mary wove for the weaving company at Pi Beta Phi, and she also learned how to take shucks, make them into strings or long cords, and put seats in chairs. And my mother learned that talent. My mother was also a very, very wonderful person in that she could sew like everything, and that she loved to embroider, and she teaches me how to embroider. Now, the only gift that I come away with is the gift of research. So, yeah. Okay, I got 2 minutes. This should wind up everything. I thank you for listening to me, reminisce about my parents. I urge you all to start and find these stories out, especially find people in the community. They're getting few and far behind that knows history and tales about your parents. The words and the numbers are all good, but the stories bring them alive. Wishing you all a wonderful day. Thank you.
Let's discuss recording your stories and preserving your old family photos here at the Maples History Center. We're on the third floor of the King Family Library in downtown Sevierville.